Gwatney Unplugged, hosted by Scott Romine, is brought to you by Gwatney Buick GMC at 5700 Landers Road in North Little Rock, next to Sam's Club. Call 501-945-4444 or visit GwatneyBuickGMC.com. GMC, we are professional grade.
Hey, Scott Romine here. We're going to talk about some of my favorite movies, some awesome stuff that came out of Universal Studios back in their prime. Vaughn Babasin, he started at Universal Studios from 1976 and worked there till 1983 and worked his way through popular films like Airport 77, Jaws 2, one of my favorites, Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers, Knight Rider, and more. How are you, Vaughn?
Oh, I'm having a great time. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm great. It's great to talk to you. You were there on all this stuff that I just love so much. Did you grow up there in California around this stuff?
Yeah, I was born in Hollywood, so I'm really the native son. And my dad was a famous jazz bass player, played with Benny Goodman, Louis Armstrong, Charlie Parker, just about everybody you can imagine. And my grandfather was an Academy Award nominated film editor for Universal for 40 years, dating back to films like My Man Godfrey in 1936. And he did a bunch of Abbott and Costello movies and just an amazing number of films for Universal for his life. So I grew up in the entertainment field all my life.
Did you get inside Universal as a kid before you ever worked there?
No, I used to hang out down in Hollywood at my dad's office in the recording studio. So I was generally in my youth, I was generally meeting amazing jazz musicians, like the best players in the world.
Wow.
And I didn't really get exposed to film until I was hired at Universal. I was 21, believe it or not, 21 years old. And it was amazing experience.
Well, if you're 68 and you grew up in this recording studio, I guess you saw the days where a song was recorded live, where everybody was in the room together at the same time. This would have been before all the multi-tracking and all of that business, correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, my dad, back in the 40s and 50s, they couldn't even overdub. They didn't have things like drum machines or any of that. if you wanted to play with a drummer, you had to go find one,
Yeah, right. Wow.
And so yeah. I mean, I saw the earliest days. In fact, my dad got the very first Sony digital recording video machine in the 70s in Los Angeles, and they were trying to archive all the old tapes, the old analog tapes, onto videotape. And believe it or not, 20 years later, it turns out that the analog tapes are the ones that have survived.
Is that
and the
wild?
The digital tape was too brittle and it just shatters, and there's no way to replace digital information. So, in an analog, you can kind of, the mic bleed from all the other mics, you can kind of put it all together. You can reconstruct something if it's missing, but you can't do that with digital. If it's gone, baby.
That's true. It's like TV stations. When it was analog, you might get a fuzzy picture. When it's digital, you just get a blue screen.
Exactly.
You don't get a little. It's all or nothing these days.
It's all or nothing. You got it.
Right. So what kind of movies and TV shows were your favorites before you end up working in movies?
Oh, boy, that's tough. I mean, I have to admit, I was a huge Jaws fan. Because that came out in 75, and I was still in college at that time. So it was just, what an amazing movie. I have to say Exorcist. The Exorcist was another phenomenal film that I just was amazed at.
Well, the sequel to Exorcist didn't live up to the original, but I think the sequel to Jaws 2, which you worked on, and we'll get into that, I think it really holds up compared to the original film. Now, when you hired on, how did you get hired at Universal Studios?
Well, first of all, it was probably the busiest time Universal had ever seen. And they had every single stage on the lot was shooting something. a movie or a TV show. And they were even renting studios on other lots like Hollywood General and MGM. So they were, in fact, they needed people so badly, they didn't have anyone on the books. And so I was one with what they called a 30-day wonder. I was hired on. I walked onto the lot, shook hands with the guy who hired me, was working the next day. But what happens is traditionally you would work 30 days and you'd get your 3 card in the union. And then you'd work another period of time and you'd get your 2 card. And then you'd work another period, you'd work your way up the ladder to get to the highest seniority.
Sure.
Well, the 30-day wonders, because they didn't have anybody on the books, once you put in 30 days, you got an instant 1 card. So after my first 30 days of work, I had the top seniority of anyone that was there on the lot.
Oh, wow.
Now, I have to also say, I was hired as a craft serviceman. So I was actually a laborer. There are 2 different labor departments on the lot. There's on production and off production. And craft service was on production labor. So we would work with any crew that is actually on a set, on a working set with the director and everything. So my very first job, I went to a mansion in Glendale with a greens crew on Rich Man, Poor Man,
Really?
of all things. Yeah.
Well, I always thought craft services is like the food people these days, correct?
Well, that's kind of what craft service was all about. But they were specifically designated to assist on-camera crews when they needed help.
I got you.
So what happened, like I said, I went to the greens crew first. The next day after I got off of Rich Man, Poor Man, I only worked that for 2 weeks. They sent me to Airport 77, stage 27. And, I walk into the stage and here's an airplane fuselage in the middle of a huge pit of water.
Wow.
with 5 dump tanks of 13,000 gallons of water that would on cue roll and have water come crashing through the fuselage of this airplane. And I was in love. I found a home. I didn't leave for 5 months of principal photography. It was just what an amazing experience at 21 years old.
You couldn't drag me away from something like that. What did Universal change about their business model that they didn't need crews like yours after 83 or whatever it was?
Sure. Yeah. Well, that was pretty much the time I left. Not only was CGI becoming prevalent, Universal decided that it was better for them, monetarily speaking, to let independent productions foot the bill of producing films. And if they like it, then they would just buy the distribution rights. So they would still score, they'd still make the money off the film, but they'd let the smaller production company actually foot the production bill and not have to take that risk. So they really, they cut down to a skeleton crew on the lot. They changed everything. That's when they moved the Psycho House from where it originally stood up to a special little hill just for the tours. The Munzer House, the same thing. They really started to focus all their attentions on the tours because they really were raking it in on the tours. And in fact, they still do.
Oh, sure they do.
Even through COVID, they still, that's one of the most popular destinations in Southern California.
Oh, no question. I've done it many times, and it is an incredible tour. It's really something, everybody needs to experience if they love movies. Go see where they were made. I want to talk, you kind of mentioned it. I really want to know what your memories are of the tram tours starting at Universal Studios, because I have to guess that started somewhat small before this thing started turning into a theme park. What do you remember of that? And I understand there was even a rule made that they were not allowed to do tours of actual movies in production. There was some kind of a SAG rule or something, and that's why you got the river flood and some other gags to entertain people rather than, going by a real set.
Yeah, that's pretty much true. You would maybe pass by a stage and see someone come out and they'd go, "Oh, look, it's in the bubble,"
Right.
That would, but for the most part, yeah, it was the parting of the Red Sea, and it was the bridge that breaks down. They just started to do what was the time tunnel. That was one of the rides.
What would that do?
It was a kind of an optical illusion. They drove through this cave with the tram, and it would be turning like the time tunnel, like you were traveling through time.
Cool.
It was just, it was interesting. But very simplistic compared to like Waterworld and
Sure.
and Harry Potter and all these big things that they do now. They're all like, they hire actors who act out the parts, and it's big time now. But back then, it was just the simplest little gags that they had, and it would always be so unrealistic to me. When I'm working in the back lot, I'm like digging a hole, or I'm sweeping down a set, or I'm doing some kind of menial task, and all along comes a freaking tram.
Oh, sure.
And it's like, oh, here's a guy working.
Right. That's right.
But it was my job, so it was just kind of surreal to have my job being an entertainment place, a theme park. It was very, very surreal.
Yeah, I think they even worked it into like an episode of Knight Rider and an episode of the A-Team. I think in the intro to the A-Team, you see George Peppard like on the tour thing, dressed as Godzilla or something. They kind of worked it into some other things.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, that was probably, just a real kind of cheap, easy way to write a script. I think a lot of shows like that. I think Rockford Files probably had one on a stage. There was some crazy guy running around killing people on the set, and so they had to,
you got to do that.
But yeah, well, it's easy for the writers that way, and location, because it's all here,
That's right. I want to ask, because you were there in '79, and there's literally no footage of this. They incorporated some kind of a live action Battlestar Galactica into the tram tour. Do you remember this? They actually had Cylons and real people playing characters, and I guess the tram would stop and they would put this on. Do you remember that at all?
Well, not really. I have to admit, it's the tours were really a separate thing from the lower lot. We were always referred to the lower. Oh, you work on the lower lot. But that means we were in the actual productions. Up on the hill, that's where the tours were. And so we didn't really focus much attention. I remember having to work on Falls Lake, which was right next to the Jaws exhibit, the lake that was the Jaws shark comes up and attacks people.
Yeah.
But
do you remember the real orca being there? Supposedly Spielberg had it brought there after the filming of the first Jaws, and it was there for a few years and disappeared.
Well, it very well could have been that actual boat that was in the tours.
Wow. I believe it was.
Shark. The shark was one of the sharks, but it was exaggerated. I remember the teeth on the tour shark they were just ridiculous.
Yeah, they call it
huge
carrot teeth. Carrot tooth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it had a name.
They didn't look anything like the ones that we made, for the actual shark.
Right. So. How did you get the job on Jaws 2?
Well, working my butt off on Airport 77.
Right.
There was an area on the lower lot there across from Stage 27, which was our home for Airport 77. And since I was kind of the runner, I was the new guy, I would be the guy that would go get things for everybody. And so the there was an area called prefab, or prefabrication, and that's where they built the actual sharks and the huge platform that it sat on. And it was adjacent to where Stage 27 was. So the whole crew, there must have been 20 guys working in prefab at that time. They would see me going to the mill 50 times a day.
Right.
And they just remark how freaking hard Vaughn works. And literally the day I was sent back to the shop from Airport 77, Jaws 2 requested me by name to come work on the crew.
Oh, that's great.
That was my next year and a half. Including 7 months in Navarre Beach,
Vaughn, when you get to Florida, are you aware, and there's no one's ever seen footage of this, that they shot for a month or two in Martha's Vineyard with a completely different script for Jaws 2, kind of based on the mafia, and Ricky Schroeder's first on-camera acting job was playing Roy Scheider's son. Right. And they were not happy with this, scrapped it all, new script, moved to Florida. Did you know that back then?
Well, actually there was more information about the director.
Really?
Yeah. What was his name?
Schwartz. There was a French guy.
Well, no, Jeannot is who they brought in.
Right, that's right.
It was the first guy. Hancock, was his name Hancock?
I think it was Hancock. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And
he was up in Martha's Vineyard.
Yep.
And I never saw him. Martha's Vineyard didn't have a union rule that had to have a craft service man on the crew. And so I didn't go on the location. I loaded the trucks up and I waved at them as they drove away. But that was really only about a month. And 3 weeks later, at 3:30 in the afternoon, when I'm just getting off my 8-hour shift, my boss came up to me and said, "Do you want to go to Florida?"
Well, sure.
And I said, "Can I have a day to think about it?" And he said, "No."
Of course.
And I said, "Okay." So he said, pack for 2 weeks. So I went home to Pacoima. And 8 hours later, because you had to have at least 8 hours off or they'd have to pay you double gold time.
Oh.
So at 11:30 at night, a black limousine comes to my house in Pacoima.
My gosh.
And takes me to LAX. And there was only one other. There was like an assistant cameraman and myself, and we were the only two crewmen who were being flown out to the location.
Oh, that's awesome. To go make Jaws 2.
So they asked for me by name. They said, "Okay, you can have one craft serviceman." "Okay, we want Vaughn." Just like,
that's
whoa.
So good.
And I'll tell you, all the old guys who had all the original one cards, they were not happy about me being able to take the biggest location in years.
That's so good. And so much of the stuff in the film, the hotel is gone from a hurricane.
Oh, I know.
I understand. Yep. It's so changed down there. I think Jaws 2 personally is up there in the realm of the best sequels. Wrath of Khan, Empire Strikes Back, Jaws 2. I love that film, Vaughn. I mean, is that one of your favorites you worked on?
Oh, no doubt about it. Of course. I mean, I actually controlled the jaws.
Oh, that's awesome.
The beauty of Jaws 2 for me personally was that it was on a location. We were 7 months away from the studio lot, so we didn't have the upper echelon breathing down our necks all the time. So when you're on location, you can kind of bend rules and do things that you ordinarily wouldn't do.
Sure.
So I got certified as a diver, and they bumped me up to effects. So I was officially an effects man. And what happened for the rest of my career at Universal, I was the kind of guy that I would be an extra set of hands if they needed me.
Right.
So I was in demand. I was like one of the, in fact, probably the main craft service man in that crew. There was a small crew of craft service in special effects that was run by Joe Pomowski, my boss. And
we've had Joe Alves on the show before. Man, he talks about what a chore it was, I guess, because you filmed Jaws 2 at sea like you did the other one.
Well, that's who thought it was a good idea to produce a movie in the ocean.
Yeah, it seems like a great idea at the time.
I guess.
I gotta ask you the obvious question that people are probably thinking in their head. You get scuba certified. Is it creepy being in the water with this mechanical shark? Did you have any experience? This is kind of scary, really.
It's a trip. It really is. I'll tell you, when the water's murky, and it's low visibility, you're swimming through water and you know that this is a fake shark. You know it is. But as you get closer, the image of that thing just starts to come into vision.
Gosh.
Oh, and that is the heart starter. Because once you see that image, that big image, it's just like, oh my God. But then you realize, of course, it's a fake shark. And there were reports that there were real sharks around, but I never saw a real shark, thank God. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't got in the water anymore.
Vaughn, what was the limitation? I mean, you worked on the shark. Obviously it was not going to work if it worked on a train track or whatever. What was the depths you had to have, and how far off the shore are you really when you're shooting some of these things?
Well, we had to be far enough away from land to where it wasn't seen in the distance.
Right.
So we were a good distance out. There was a pier that was built right there at the Navarre Beach Holiday Inn, and we would be picked up at the end of the pier by Boston whalers, and they would have to shuttle us out to where the set was. Right. You call it the set.
Sure, the set.
But we had actually 3 sharks. 2 of them were platform sharks, one mounted from the left and one mounted from the right, depending on camera angle. And then there was the sea sled shark. That was the crew that I worked on. A sea sled shark was towed by a huge umbilical cord of cables and air hoses that were controlled, had air compressors on the ship that we towed it with. So anytime there was a long-range scene of the shark swimming, that was the sea sled shark.
Like the shark chasing the water skiing girl.
Exactly. You got it. You see, and when it was close, like the helicopter attack, that's when they incorporated the platform shark, because the motion, you didn't need long-range motion. He was just right there attacking the helicopter,
Yeah,
same
that's
thing
a
with
great scene too. I encourage people to go on YouTube. There is a director's cut of that scene. That scene was cut down quite a bit for the theatrical release, I guess, where you see the helicopter pilot all terrified inside and all. I guess there was more to what you filmed than what we ever saw.
Oh, of course. Oh, there always is. There always is. I mean, there's always scenes on the cutting room floor, as they say.
Sure.
That's what editing is all about, and you've got to work through the best scenes as much as you can. The nightmare, and I'm sure you've seen it. The scene where Mike is just barely pulled into the boat just before the shark bites down.
You see the mechanics in his mouth.
And you see the mechanical, I know, and everybody just bitches that out so much. Just so, but you didn't, I mean, back then we didn't have VCRs. We didn't have videotape. You couldn't freeze frame a single shot and see what you saw,
No.
It all happened in real time. So there was never a stink about it until people could freeze that frame and say, "Oh, look, oh my God, look at that, oh, terrible," It's like, oh.
It also pinches his mouth up kind of unnaturally in a triangle. Now everybody's going to go watch Jaws 2, but a lot of people know about that, though.
That was actually a cable in the rigging of the sailboat that got hung up on his mouth.
Really?
Yes, so that's right where you see the crease, the bend.
Yep.
There's actually a cable right there that goes up into the rigging of the sailboat. But you just can't really see. It's happened so fast. Even freeze frame, you don't really see the cable. but you can see the ram down in his mouth, and everybody gets all freaked out. And then of course, they change the the contrast on the film. I mean, on the picture itself, so it makes it much more prevalent. Oh yeah, look, there's the ram right there. You can see it.
So, like that shot, Vaughn. How many times would you have attempted that shot? Was that a one take, and we're moving on?
No, we probably did that 10 times.
Wow.
And it's, every setup takes, you have to go all the way around again, lead him all the way around and then come back in a circle to where he's in the proper trajectory to pull him by that boat and take that shot. It was like the helicopter. Of course, we had the real helicopter that the pilot flew in, but we had an empty shell of a copy of the helicopter that we just barely held together with, with pop rivets and a hot glue gun.
Well, how did you do the shot with the propellers hitting the water and all of that?
Well, that's, again, it's intercut. We're pulling the helicopter with cables and there was just like a variac built into the blades, so they would have the motion of the spin. They didn't go as fast as they should have, of course.
Yeah.
But as it hits, then you see the broken pieces of the blades. We loaded those up into air mortars, air cannons, and shot them through the sails of the sailboats. Oh, yeah,
which was great editing.
Yeah, and it's all done in editing. That's the magic of Hollywood, And like we're saying, you shoot as much as you can and edit together what works best.
And the island was fake, right?
Yeah, Cable Junction was all fiberglass rocks all tied down to a barge. In fact, one of the last jobs that I actually had, we flew, of all things, we flew home for Christmas. Mm-hmm. First unit wrapped December 24th, and we flew home for Christmas. And then December 26th, second unit was back at Universal at 6 a.m. to fly back out.
Really?
And I spent New Year's Day or New Year's Eve at Navarre Beach at this Holiday Inn. They had the huge freaking block party in the Holiday Inn. It was really cool.
In the hotel, in the movie.
Yeah. Well, yeah, right. They at the very beginning of the movie when they have the dedication and Ann Dusenberry. Yeah, that's the Holiday Inn. That was actually it. We lived there for 7 months.
Did you ever talk to Roy Scheider?
Oh, a little bit. He was pretty aloof most of the time. The guy who was really, really friendly was Jeffrey Kramer. What a guy. He was so cool.
Yeah, the deputy.
The deputy, yeah. He's such a nice guy.
What about Murray Hamilton? Did you meet Murray?
Yeah, he is okay. He's a little kind of silly, but he was cool. He was more open than Roy. Roy was really, according to everybody, Roy was he didn't want to be there. He was forced to do it from contractual obligations from Universal. So
right.
So he wasn't really happy to be there anyway. And, he spent most of his time in a Speedo sunning himself.
That's what I've read. Yeah.
With a reflector panel under his chin.
Getting himself too tan for the film. Who made the burned up body? Did you work on that?
Well, yeah, we had it sitting in the office for the longest time.
Really?
Yeah, it was just sitting on a stool in the office, in the special effects office for months.
Oh, that is great. Man, I love that movie. I think Jaws 2 is so strong and so underrated.
Yeah, it's amazing, the fan base. It really is. I mean, like I said, this guy, Michael Smith, he felt the need to write a book about it, and it's very well received.
I love the ending where Roy, is tapping the thing and getting him he electrocutes the shark. I guess, were you in the water when we do this? Was it dangerous? What did we use to burn the shark up?
Well, again, it's all put together in edit, and we burned two different sharks. The first one, I was very fortunate to be able to carry a 35 millimeter camera with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I have some really amazing behind the scenes shots of both shark burns. Um, the close up one that you're really on top of, I was sitting there. There's this massive ship that has a crane, and the crane has the cameraman in a wetsuit lowered down into the water so he can get the angle of the shark that he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting right next to the crane with a fire extinguisher because that's my job.
Well, sure.
And the pyrotechnician is sitting right next to me. And, we had run tests on back at the lot about what kind of different powders would work and look right. And, when you first see, I actually had a motor drive on my camera and I took 6 shots in a row. And the first one is just completely obliterated by the explosion. You can't even see the shark.
Because
there was so much, always overkill, always more.
Oh, that's great.
But as it goes on and the fire comes down, you see all of a sudden you see the cameraman get closer, and I have one shot that's just so beautiful.
Man,
of the shark just on fire and the cameraman's right there.
Oh, I just love that. I just love it. Real quickly, so cool. I got 30 seconds. The shark on the set is loud, right? It's mechanical.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what does it sound like?
Well, the platform had more mechanics to it. The most of the noise from the sea sled was happening on the ship that was towing it. So you didn't really hear the same sounds out of the shark that you did from the platform shark.
I got you.
But yeah, I mean, they were, huge metal cogs and this gigantic arm, that lifted him.
The magic of Jaws. My son and I, we love watching the Kurt Russell, John Carpenter movie, The Thing, because how are you going to beat flamethrowers out in the snow? I mean, you're just not going to beat that. We're talking to Vaughn Babasin, who worked on The Thing. How did you get that job? Because what an awesome movie.
I'll tell you. Well, Roy Arbogast was a foreman on Jaws 2. And a couple of years later, he came back to the lot to do The Incredible Shrinking Woman, which was Joel Schumacher's directorial debut with Lily Tomlin.
You got to make Batman and Robin and all that stuff.
And yeah, exactly. Yeah. Joel Schumacher. So he came up to me and asked me to work on Shrinking Woman. And I was honored, thank you very much. So the same scenario happened a couple of years later, and he comes on the lot. There were 2 big movies, 2 big effects films that year, Cat People and The Thing. And I was going to have pretty much my pick of the litter there. I was going to get to work on one or the other. And when Roy asked me to work on The Thing, I just said yes. I'm John Carpenter. How could I say no to that?
Well, if you'd have worked on Cat People, we'd all remember it. I mean,
it's funny because of all the movies for me to pick, and of course we all know it was a bomb when it released.
Yeah, but it's great.
But 40 years later, they're heralding it as the finest horror film of all time.
Oh, yeah. He even made a prequel, even made another one.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and back when it first released, they didn't even consider doing any kind of a sequel or prequel or anything because it didn't succeed,
Misunderstood. It's kind of like Blade Runner in a way. Blade Runner.
Yeah, sure.
Same era, and nobody got it. And now we all love it, strange.
True. Yeah, I know. It is bizarre.
What did you
But I'm really happy to see John and Dean get their accolades.
Definitely. What did you build on The Thing?
Oh, let's see. Well, I had my hand in most everything. I worked with Roy's crew. I worked for 5 months on, again, Stage 27. That was our home stage. That was Compound 31, was all built on Stage 27. And we worked on, the floorboards, the creature that blows through at the end there. And that was one of the greatest effects gigs I ever worked. It was so cool.
Oh, yeah.
The cart underneath the stage that on cue would fire the shell through the balsa wood boards and chase Kurt Russell down the hallway there. It's so cool. But then we did, there was the autopsy scene. Oh my God. That was, Rob Bottin really wanted a realistic look. So
Sure.
he had us go to a butcher shop and get actual cow entrails to load into the creature.
It must have been shocking walking on a set and seeing the kind of things we see in The Thing. I mean, it's shocking.
Oh yeah, the sculpt. It was. I still say it was the most creative atmosphere I'd ever worked in. You had these wonderful conceptual artists, Mike Plug, Mentor Hubner. They worked for, Marvel Comics and these outrageous animators that they would draw the concepts. They'd sit there with Bottin and they'd draw the concepts up. And then those would go over to the mold makers and the sculptors, and the sculptors would try to make those creatures appear as close to the pictures as they could, and then the mold makers from the sculptors, they would make these molds and then fill them with whatever. I mean, there were all kinds of different things. Of course, foam rubber latex is really
Sure.
what you make prosthetics out of. And so the whole chest blow from Charlie, that was all painstakingly sculpted. And, it just was just remarkable. And everyone that worked on that, there was Rob Berman, who was from the Berman Studios, and Tom Savini came in and worked a little bit, and Stan Winston came in to do the dog creature.
Oh, that's so
it was
cool.
like just the coolest of makeup effects people worked on that. It was just amazing.
Well, I mean, Bottin had just done, I guess, Empire Strikes Back, and I mean, I think he made RoboCop's suit years later.
Well, yeah, he was a RoboCop guy too.
Yep.
Yeah, the Howling.
Yep, the Howling. Yep.
He was Rick Baker protege. I had worked with Rick Baker on The Incredible Shrinking Woman, of all things. He played Sidney the gorilla because he had the best industry gorilla suit out there. And so I got to work with Rick Baker on Shrinking Woman, and then I didn't actually complete my thought on the cruise. After the 5 months of working with the mechanical effects crew of Roy, he went on location and left 3 of our crew members back, which I was included. But the next day, again, another next day, Dave Kelsey, who was a good friend of mine, foreman boss, he was the head of the mechanical effects crew division of Bottin's makeup effects crew. And so they brought me over there for 5 more months. And I got to work on just about every creature transformation you can think. I did one specific thing I did was I built a little corner of the kennel. When you see, there's a close up of a dog. He's in the crease. He's in the corner of the kennel, and he gets wrapped up by tentacles.
Right.
I mean, looks like he's just freaking tied up.
Oh yeah.
Well, that was my baby.
Oh, that's so great.
I built that corner, and it had to hang upside down because it was a film effect. It had to go backwards. That is all shot backwards. So they had to hang the set upside down with the dog in place, all wrapped up and gooed the heck out KY jelly up the yin yang.
Yeah.
That just was all wrapped up. and with all these loose tentacles outside of the set, it was like when they said action, we just grabbed it and pulled as, like a tug of war. And as the rubber tentacles got thinner and thinner, they started to release from the dog. And so you can see these tentacles start to go away from the dog, and finally there's none. And then they reverse the film, and you see these tentacles just freaking launch themselves into this poor dog.
I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna have to go watch it again. I gotta ask you the obvious question here. You worked on The Thing. At the end, is McCready or Childs The Thing? What's your thoughts on that? I know Carpenter knows.
I swear that when it was first released, I heard an interview that John had said that they were both human at the end.
Okay.
Now, I stick with that. I say if John said it, then John knows more than anybody.
Well, I
But
understood they shot lots of different endings and they would keep testing them, but he came back to the thing where they're just going to sit there and freeze to death together.
well, yeah, I don't know how many they did. I know there was at least one alternate ending. I don't know how many they may have tried to shoot, but yeah, for sure there were two, and this one was the one that they decided to go with.
Oh, what a great film. So I got a couple of minutes. I want to ask you, there's an Arkansas connection to a show you worked on, and that is Gil Gerard is from Little Rock, and he ends up playing Buck Rogers, and you worked on Buck Rogers.
Nice. Well, actually, the first time I met Gil was on Airport 77. He's one of the crew guys on Airport 77.
Wow.
That cast had a lot of up-and-comers. Monty Markham, Arlene Galanka. There were so many people amongst all the big actors like Christopher Lee and Lee Grant and Olivia de Havilland and Jack Lemmon and Brenda Vaccaro, But there was, Darren, what's his name? The Night Stalker guy.
Right.
He was in the cast, and like I said, Monty Markham and Gil Gerard. So when I got a shot to go go work with Buck Rogers, I worked on the actual pilot, the 2-part pilot.
That's
Awakening.
Right. The Awakening.
Yeah, I was on the Ghoul set where it was like in a smoky graveyard, and Tweaky and him are running around being chased by all these kind of zombie-ish
yes, I
looking
remember
guys.
that. Like he tried to go back to Earth or something, and it was all changed or something like that.
Yeah. And that ended the first episode, but also started the second episode because it was, like I said, a 2-part story. So that was kind of cool. Aaron Gray shows up to save him.
Yeah. Wish that would happen.
But another cool thing was I was actually knew Tweaky, Felix Silla. He was a friend of mine. He lived in Vegas, but we hung out together. He played Cousin It in the original Addams Family.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think he was in a lot of things. I think he was in an episode of Dukes of Hazzard. They did an Alien episode, and I think he wore the suit in that.
Yeah, Felix was a busy guy. No doubt about it.
Any memories of Knight Rider?
Well, the car itself. I was on Knight Rider. I basically was in the shop. When I worked in the shop, the effects shop, I worked in the metal shop because there are different variations. But I was the only guy who was hard enough worker to actually work in the steel shop and lug plates of steel and
right.
Holy mackerel, what a job that was. All the welding, when we would weld in roll bars in cars and cannons. I don't know if you knew.
Oh yeah, cannons do flip overs and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay, cool. You know all about that. Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, cannon rolls.
So yeah, we used to do that. Load in a length of telephone pole with a bomb in it.
That's basic, which you can see in some films. You can see in the bottom of the truck in Raiders Lost Ark.
Oh yeah,
you can see the whole thing, how it worked.
Yeah.
So very, very fascinating stuff, man. I really appreciate you coming on Gwatney Unplugged and giving us some inside look at things like Jaws 2 and the universe. What do you miss the most about the whole movie thing?
Oh, gosh. It was so fun because it was never the same thing twice. It would be like, as soon as you got something down, you'd never do it again.
Right. Yeah. And it's junk now. The prop now is junk. It's useless.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. That I remember seeing the big shopping cart we did for Shrinking Woman and the rocking chair on the tour for years after we had done that.
Did you get to keep anything cool?
Me? Oh, I tried to keep. Yeah. I've got an oversized switch plate that was from the Shrinking Woman, and I had a full set of teeth from Jaws, but they're gone now. I gave them away to kids through my life.
Oh, dang.
that kind of thing. You know how it is.
You didn't save me one. Dang it.
But I have my pictures. My pictures are really cool. There's actually a book that Michael A. Smith put together that's the making of Jaws 2. And he had done a first printing, but I met him online, and he ended up interviewing a whole bunch of other people, including myself, and he did a second printing. And he's got 28 pages of my story and all my pictures in his book.
Oh, that is
so that's
fantastic.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You have a lot of wonderful pictures. Where can people follow you online? I've seen some of them posted.
Well, yeah, I'm most active on Facebook. I hate to say it. I know people are against Facebook, but yeah, and I even have a Jazz in Hollywood page. I'll dedicate it to my father, but there are many different groups, crew stories, a lot of thing appreciation groups out there that I usually take part in and share stories with.
Well, thank you so much, Vaughn. I really appreciate you taking time out of the day to be on the show. You guys go have a great Saturday. We'll see you next week on Gwatney Unplugged.